Hello and welcome to Why Wait Till Saturday recap of week 9. So, had a really nice week, all things considered. The lineups we put in there cashed all double ups, triple ups, threw a quintuple up in there, I think. So basically your cash games were straight money. The tournaments actually cashed most lineups that I was in. Didn't hit any of the big money because I did not have Eli Moore, who we will talk about from Ole Miss. But otherwise, let's review real quick. But all the guys that I was really high on in the preview episode, Spencer Sanders, Michael Penix, both of those almost hit about 5x value. Sanders was great, went into overtime. I thought that game could really, make some money, but overtime was not fruitful for Oklahoma State. I tweeted about it, but it wasn't in the video because we didn't know Trevor Lawrence was going to be out. But once he became out, DJ Uiagalelei ended up being a great choice. He was 6,800. It's really just, I trust the offense. I trust Swinney. And I trust the playmakers there. I thought he could produce at 6,800. He came way through for us, 33 points off of 6,800. He was about 5x as well. So really liked that value and ended up having a ton of him, basically making those decisions on Saturday morning. So those were the three quarterbacks I had the most of. I only had one ETN. I really liked him actually once the Lawrence news was out. I figured they could lean on him. I did tweet about that as well. But I ended up only having one. That lineup ended up pretty good, but he smashed, 43 points, even at the 8,700 price tag. He was, I think, the highest producing running back on the slate. So ton of work in the passing game, which, you could expect, but he was fantastic. But Breece Hall came through as the number one running back. Loved him, even at his price tag. He was 4x at 37 points off a $9,100 salary. And once he hit the second big run, I think he had a 60-yarder at the end of the game or in the fourth quarter, all of a sudden everything looked good for the second half because he was basically then salvaging all the non-ETN lineups I had, and we were competitive in the second half. But I was sweating that until he came through with the big run. Letty Brown was a tough one. I really liked him, probably had the most of him in terms of running back. The volume potential and the price tag just really worked. He wasn't bad. He came in 3x, 26 points off 8,100. He was stuffed 3 straight tries at the goal line early in the game, which would have been excellent for him to be able to get another touchdown. But just not as explosive. Breece Hall and Travis Etienne are more explosive guys, and both of them broke off huge chunk gains and I think at least had a long TD each. Letty Brown's not going to do that. He's a volume guy, and it just didn't work out. Javian Hawkins, wish I had more of him. Talked myself out of him a little bit, but he was huge at the end of the day with 37 points, almost a 5x producer. But, he had a 90-yard run in the fourth quarter, I think, or the third quarter, and ended up with like 123 rushing yards. So if it wasn't for that big run, which we know he can do, we know he can break that off. That's part of why he's appealing. But, without that, he's a lot less interesting. It is what it is with him in that matchup. Let's see. Kyron Williams was really disappointing. I was very heavy on him. He still had 3x. This isn't a guy that killed you, especially in cash games, but Notre Dame just stopped using him. He ended up with 15 carries, I think 2 receptions, so 17 touches in a game that they controlled the entire game, much like we thought they would. I just can't believe he didn't get to 20 carries. Basically, the whole fourth quarter was the backup Sibo Flemister. And it's frustrating when you see that because you got teams like Ole Miss who were throwing it in the third quarter with their starters up, 3 or 4 or 5 touchdowns. And then Kyron Williams gets, put in bubble wrap in the third quarter. When he still had 2 touchdowns, but he didn't get to 100 yards. And you would like to see him really explode. He had a great game. 15 for like 75 yards and 2 touchdowns, 2 receptions. Just didn't get the volume that I thought they would, controlling that game from start to finish. Jared Dokes, didn't have any of him, kind of didn't like him that much, and he wound up terrible, even though since he scored a ton of points because they scored it pretty much through the air. Tank Bigsby, again, another volume problem. Really high on him, but I kind of backed off just because I mean, they don't seem to be giving him 25 carries, even though I think they absolutely should. I thought he'd be used in the passing game. He didn't get used in the passing game. I think I had one or two lineups with Bigsby. He came through with 19 points, but didn't even get to 3X. Again, scored 2 touchdowns, but just the volume. I mean, didn't get the yards, didn't get the bonus, things like that. One of the real value plays, so we were talking about Vandy plays, Keon Henry Brooks, 3,900, was clearly going to be the starter heading into the game. And ended up with 25.5 points. Now, he did have a catch for about 50 or 60 yards at the end of the game, garbage catch, and he had a garbage touchdown, basically 1-yard plunge, the last score of the game when they were way out of it. But he produced, 25 points off 3,900. He was 6.5X, allowed you to do a lot of other things. I ended up having a pretty good amount of him. He's a good-looking player, actually. The matchup was exactly what you want. Ole Miss, we're going to continue to really target Ole Miss. The fact that Vandy had a couple guys explode means anybody's in play against Ole Miss. But I really, 3,900, you just couldn't argue it. He ended up with like almost 20 touches, and scored 25.5 points. Even without the touchdown, he's at 19 points at 3,900, which is going to do it all day for you anyway. So that was really nice to see. I should have been even heavier on him, but again, Vandy scared me off, but it worked. Jerry and Ely ended up backing off of him completely. Just made me nervous with the game flow. They weren't going to need to use him too much, and he came through only 11.4 points, really a dud. And then Snoop Connor, which the other Ole Miss running back, at 4,300, I was real in on him. He got a short yardage touchdown early. I thought it was game on. And then they just threw all game. They were up 33-14 in the third quarter and still proceeded to throw 3 more touchdown passes, both 2 with Corral and 1 with their backup Plumlee. They just didn't stop throwing the ball. I kept thinking, okay, this is the drive. Snoop's going to get 20 carries, and fall into the end zone at the end. And they just didn't do it. I can't explain it. The game flow was perfect. Everything was exactly what I thought. I just kept thinking fourth quarter is Snoop Connor time, and it never happened. His touchdown was actually early in the game. So I was like, man, we're going to get 2 out of this. Didn't happen. 9.2 points off 4,300. Again, not a total killer, but certainly wasn't going to win you any tournaments or anything like that. That was a big bummer. I thought the process there was really good, and I can't explain. I guess Lane Kiffin he's never going to take the pedal off the gas or the foot off the gas. So, there we go. All right. Speaking of Ole Miss not taking the foot off the gas, Eli Moore. I love Eli Moore, so it really kind of hurts because he's been a guy all off season and now into the season. He is just obscene. Now we've got, I think, all but one game on the season, double-digit catches. He went absolutely bonkers, over 200 yards and 3 touchdowns in the first half. 7X off the most expensive wide receiver. He still went for 7X, 8,400, and scored 59.2 DraftKings points. If you didn't have Eli Moore, we still cashed, okay, in the cash games, double ups, etc. If you didn't have Eli Moore in a tournament, just hope to cash, min cash, or something like that. You weren't gonna get to the top without Eli Moore. And I had 0. I had a little in the beginning. I kind of liked him, but that's why I went with Snoop Connor. I thought, okay, he might have 1 or 2 touchdowns and 125 yards, which is good, but at 8,400, I thought we could find value elsewhere. And just Lane Kiffin just dialed up passes all day, all night long. And anyway, yeah, and I love Eli Moore. Happy for him, and been really excited about his potential for the NFL next year. And, putting up these stats, he's going to be in the top 3 rounds, I think, at this point. He's going to finish this year with like 1,500 yards and maybe 10 touchdowns or something. It's just, he's going to He's going to be very exciting player, absolute electric with the ball in his hands. We just didn't have him in DraftKings this week. Terrence Marshall ended up backing off completely on Terrence Marshall. And because I actually said, if anything, LSU is going to need to run the ball. They didn't do anything at all. So they didn't run, they didn't pass. It was just a total shutdown. And, Auburn, like I said, they pumped the brakes on Ole Miss, who can score in buckets. And so LSU seemed like they have a good offense, but I was a little worried at Auburn that they were going to show up, and they certainly did in a big way on defense. Anyway, Marshall was a complete afterthought, 6.8 DraftKings points. I mean, killed you. Fortunately, I did not have any, and I wasn't high on him. I thought, you can't ignore a guy who's scored 2 touchdowns in every single game leading into this week, but ended up 7,800. I just didn't love it. Second most expensive wide receiver, and just didn't think it was a perfect spot. All right, Tylan Wallace was huge on Tylan Wallace. Maybe not every single lineup, but I think 75+% of my lineups had Tylan Wallace. He was incredible. 44.7 points on $7,100 price tag, 6.29x price to production. He saved everything. He had 2 touchdowns, I think 160, 75 yards. Just was phenomenal. He's a great player. Especially within that offense. The matchup looked good. The price tag was nice. No problems. I'm glad he saved pretty much every lineup, I think, him and Spencer Sanders. And then they went to overtime, and I thought, if this overtime goes to 4, iterations back and forth, maybe we can overtake those Eli Moore people that had Eli Moore. And started to get excited toward the end of that game. And then Oklahoma State went 3 and out or 4 and out, I guess, and lost the game and didn't get any more, but he certainly got us in the money. And that was a perfect pick. He was one of my big, guys this week. Tutu Atwell, he's a great player. It wasn't the best matchup. And and it turns out they did run on Vatek a little bit more. Malik Cunningham threw 3 touchdowns, but not to Atwell. And he didn't come through. I think I had 1. Didn't really go high on Atwell. Amari Rogers, again, he's a floor play, it seems. 19.6 points, 3x his price, but didn't get to 100 yards yet again. He's not winning a whole lot for us on DraftKings. Seth Williams was a bummer. I had a bunch of him at the end of it all, thinking Auburn was going to have to, it's going to be more of a back and forth game, but he only had 10 points. I think he had 4 for 70 or 3 for 70, something like that. Again, still the huge yard per reception. I just thought they'd need to use him more, but they kind of didn't. Bo Nix went crazy, which we'll talk about in a minute. It just, Seth Williams didn't get his share. So he was a bit of a killer in the lineups that he was in, and I had quite a bit. Really limited, obviously, the ceiling of those lineups. Whop Phillier was awesome. We had so much Indiana. Phillier was great. He went for 4x. He got over 100 yards, didn't get in the end zone, even though Penix threw 3 touchdowns. But still, that's great. 4x is never going to hurt you. Let's see. Kwame Lassiter, he was okay. Super cheap, 4,200. Went 3.2x. And he certainly did not kill you at that price. Vandy receiver Cam Johnson, definitely mentioned him, although I didn't end up playing any because I got real shy about just Vandy pass catchers. I liked the running back a little bit more. They have a true freshman quarterback. I didn't know what to expect, but Cam Johnson had 14 receptions for 90-something yards. 14 receptions. In PPR, he had 23 points off of 4,200, 5.6x. Absolutely great. Wish I had more of him, instead of Lassiter and then the next guy, Alec Pierce, who is another 4,200. So there were 3 4,200 receivers. I went a lot of Lassiter Pierce. I went no Cam Johnson. Boy, that could have changed some things. Pierce, though, man, he got injured in the second quarter. He was already tracking with 15.1 points. He had a touchdown early, either in the first or early second quarter. I thought this was big time game on, then got injured, didn't come back to the field. So he wound up 3.5x, not going to kill you, but could have been a lot better. I think, could have easily gotten to 20 points maybe, which would have been real nice. Abdur Rahman was another Vandy receiver. Again, stayed away from them. He had 0, so not sure what's up with that. He was their second leading receiver heading into the game. And then Peyton Hendershot, another one, Indiana Hoosier, 3,600, wound up with 2 touchdowns, scored 21 points, and was 6X. Had a ton of Hendershot. I mean, just 3,600 with, I think, the likely volume he was going to see. Obviously, never expect 2 touchdowns, but obviously that was very nice. And he was huge for me. That's kind of a rundown. Again, most guys hit. The ones that didn't had either injury, Alec Pierce or Snoop Connor. I mean, again, I think the process was pretty good. I don't know. They didn't give it to him, even though it seemed like the game flow would have dictated that. We were good on fading LSU completely. We were pretty good on fading Texas completely. Cunningham, I shied away from him for Louisville, and he had over 300 yards, which I didn't expect, but 3 interceptions and ended up the cheaper quarterbacks that I had were better value plays. The Vandy cheap guys ended up being good, and Indiana was kind of an ugly game. I mean, the first half was real, just gross, but Penix ended up coming through with a rushing touchdown, 3 passing touchdowns, as they pulled away from Rutgers in the second half. And then the problems were Bigsby was under volume, even though he looked good and scored 2 touchdowns. Kyron Williams, again, I mean, that was one of those, like, the process was perfect. The game flow was perfect. I don't know why they didn't give it to him. It was one of his lowest volume games of the season, for really no explanation there. And then obviously fading Ole Miss, other than Snoop Connor, was a terrible idea. They were just, they just kept passing the ball. I mean, every single passing touchdowns made me want to cry. Matt Corral ended up with 47 points, 6 touchdowns, had over 400 yards. I mean, he had like 304 in the first half, and then they kept going to him. And I had no Corral at all. 2 other quarterbacks, or another quarterbacks I did talk about was Hendon Hooker. He had 34 points, 3 rushing touchdowns, but didn't do a whole lot through the air and didn't do a whole lot even on the ground yardage wise. But 3 rushing touchdowns will get you a long way. Ended up having a little bit of him, but not very much. And then Bo Nix was crazy. He was actually on the tournament winning team, and we'll go over that here in a second. But Bo Nix was 41 points. He had over 300 yards, I think, for the first or second time all year. He was great, and none of it went to Seth Williams, which was wild. So that was kind of a weird – certainly LSU defense is not very good. I think now we can say – now that Auburn has come in, which is a fairly clunky offense, and just blitzed them, dominating the game. They smoked them on the scoreboard. Bo Nix looked great, and he's not very great. So I think we can definitely take away from this going forward. LSU, let's target them on defense going forward. And so Bo Nix, I had none. He was 41 points off a pretty affordable $7,100 price tag. So, that looked great for those that went Bo Nix. So, yeah, let's look at the tournament winner. Cashing, we did fine. So we don't need to really, I think, evaluate that too much. That worked. And but the tournaments, I always like to look and see what won, that I didn't see. And so Bo Nix, didn't see him coming at all, kind of like Tank Bigsby more. Although I do see a rationale. He was fairly inexpensive, although he was more expensive than the guys I really liked, Sanders, Penix, and DJ U from Clemson. But performed like crazy. Henry Brooks was on the winning lineup. Obviously, he was great. Breece Hall was on the winning lineup. Obviously, he was great. Actually, Etienne was not on the winning lineup. So he wasn't a must. But a must was Eli Moore. And we've already talked about him. Anthony Schwartz was on the winning lineup. And he was 4,900, came in with 25 points. He had a real long – so he had 4 receptions. That's not great, but he had like a 90-yard or 75-yard touchdown, and he's very fast. That's certainly, not out of the realm of possibility with him. Probably don't love anybody with 4 receptions at but at 4,900, I mean, maybe if he was at 4,200, I would have been more, in that group of the other guys, I would have played a couple, but 4,900, he was just kind of out of my range that I liked. And he took a long one to the house. I mean, other than that long one to the house, he would have been like 12 points or something like that. So again, it happened, but, kind of not a volume play anymore. I wasn't in on Nix, therefore I wasn't really in on Schwartz. I thought if anything, Seth Williams was the play, the one-off Auburn guy to play, and it ended up being Schwartz. All right, Charlie Kohler. He was fine. 3 receptions. He's a tight end for Iowa State. He had 14 points, and he was only 4,000. So, he was a good price point. But, I think Lassiter had a bigger upside, and he scored about the same. Alec Pierce scored more at about the same price tag. So I think we had good choices in that price range. But Kohler fit for this particular user who won the big tournament. And then Cornell Powell, he's interesting. I really thought about him at some point in the process. I didn't really list him by name, but he's listed as a starter on the Clemson depth chart. He's not a big name, but he has been producing. The problem is, he's really only been catching 3 or 4 balls a game, but he's certainly out there on the field. It's a high-powered offense. It made some sense at 3,800. Super cheap. And I just didn't do it. I kind of thought about it and then just didn't do it. Had a monster game. 11 receptions, season high for over 100 yards, 24 points at 3,800. Excellent play in hindsight. And I kind of wish I would have done it, especially when I added some DJU. I was pretty much going like naked DJU. I didn't pair him with Rodgers. I didn't pair him with, I had one ETN paired with him, which ended up being good because a lot of ETN's production was through the air. But, it would have made sense maybe to throw a Powell in there because he was so cheap. Maybe they've been practicing together. I don't know. But that was a nice connection on Saturday. And again, in hindsight, that would have been not a bad idea just to do a couple if I was playing so much DJ. And finally, Matt Corral, we've talked about him, was in the winning lineup. You really had to have Corral, Eli Moore, and then one of Brees or ETN, I think, and probably, frankly, Bo Nix. I was a little off on the court. I was good on the value quarterbacks. I was just off on the ceiling quarterbacks, especially Corral. Will he have 6 touchdowns ever again in his career? Maybe not. So, will Eli Moore have 200 yards and 3 touchdowns ever again in his career? Maybe not. Probably not. So, I was not in on career days of 2 different players that it was obvious against Vandy. That was not something that was like out of nowhere. We talked about it in the preview show. Vandy is terrible on defense. The hypothesis was simply that they wouldn't need to keep going, and they did, and they just kept scoring. Scored 50-something points. And so, that's just where I missed because it was obvious, play Ole Miss. That was like the easiest play on the slate, play Ole Miss. High-powered offense, terrible defense. I just thought they'd come off the gas a little bit. If you just had a lineup and you're looking at it and you don't know anything about, only a little about college football, you're like, anyone versus Vandy. So it was very heavy pick on everybody else. So obviously limited our chances at any kind of big money. But otherwise, honestly, pretty happy about the week. Yeah, so that's the recap. Wish I would have at least done one Ole Miss stack and just fit it in. Wish I would have done some Cam Johnson because out of Vandy. Wish I would have done some Cornell Powell out of Clemson. Otherwise, really happy with the choices. Nothing really just totally flopped. Wish Alec Pierce wouldn't have gotten injured. So those are the regrets. But, we're going to do this again. Week 10 is coming up, and why wait till Sunday? Let's put in some lineups on Saturday and have a good time.